So at this point, you finished your first video on practice and becoming an active reader. Now we're going to actually start reading. So you have a new handout in front of you with a letter on it to focus your annotations as we start to read the poem. So you should have your daybook out and in front of you with the new handout out and in front of you as well. Please open up your daybook to page 9, titled Angles of Literacy. As you listen and read along to the pages, circle the 5 key or most important nouns or ideas or objects. Underline the 5 key verbs or actions that readers or writers do. Please take a moment to look at the visual provided in the text. Also look at the title, Angles of Literacy, and look at how the visual relates to that title. Oftentimes when there's a visual in a text, the creators of the text want you to really think about how the visual is associated with what they will be writing about. Please write 5 words above the line on the picture to talk about what you think about when you see the visual. And then on the bottom, please write 5 more words of how this visual relates to the 2 words angles and literacy. There are no wrong answers. We just want to get our minds ready for reading. Angles of literacy. Reading can be just like a conversation. A writer talks and you listen, trying to figure out what the writer is saying to you. This is what literacy is all about, not just reading, but understanding and interacting with what you read. In this daybook, you will learn how to hold up your end of the conversation, marking and highlighting the text, connecting what you read to your own experiences, trying to look through the eyes of the writer to discover his or her perspective, studying the writer's language and craft. These are all strategies you can use to turn your reading experiences into conversations with literature. So in case you struggled with what to write for your words at the top, here's a model of what I did. This picture makes me think about New York, obviously. This reminds me of New York City. I think it's New York City based on the picture. It is beautiful. It reminds me of traveling. If you look at the picture and you have the river here and all of these things in the background, all of these buildings, it makes me think of the word vastness or how big the world is, or even just this one city. It makes me think about different points of view, because if you're standing on this section of the bridge here, you're going to have a different viewpoint than if you were actually standing here in the midst of the city. So there's all different views, and that relates to this idea of an angle. And then landscapes. Landscapes are all about what you see. And then at the bottom, 5 words that have to do with both angles and literacy. I wrote far and near. I keep having this echoing in my head. And I think whether you're far away from something or close or near it, it influences how much you see. And it's just similar to writing, because based on what the author gives us with words, that's the only thing we can see. Okay? That's what we're interacting with. So when we're reading a text from different angles, because literacy is about reading, we have to depend on the author. So what the author shows us is what we're going to know. And literacy is understanding those words. I also thought of the darkness versus light. So this is kind of really dark and this is light, and the authors kind of have to shed light on certain aspects of the story, and sometimes they want to keep us in the darkness, right? Sometimes they want us to be on the edge of our seat and they don't want us to see the whole picture, right? They only want us to see a certain angle or perspective. So I asked you to underline and circle some nouns and verbs. I circled the verbs conversation, literacy, experiences, perspective, language and craft. Okay, and then I went back and I highlighted the word conversation because it appeared multiple times. And so when I think of literacy, literacy is can you read? And reading is definitely like having a conversation with the author and a conversation with the characters. The verbs I underlined were understanding, interacting. That is the key to active reading. Of course, we want you to understand, but we also want your brain to be interacting with the text. So in high school, you're not just thinking about what's happening, you're really trying to process why it's happening, how it's happening, what tools the author is using, what author's craft is, the language that they're using. Okay, so here, I'm asking you to explain why you highlighted and circled some words. And so I just wrote a little sentence. Even though reading is mental, it happens in your brain, it's a mental process, it's like talking, it's a conversation. So when you're having a conversation, you are being active. Obviously, when words repeat, that is important. I also noticed that there are different ways to say talking in the text. So we have that word conversation. When you listen, probably should have highlighted that word listen, right? You're having, if you're going to listen, you have to be active, right? That's important. So also, having that experience where you're listening is going to help. So listening, reading, talking, they all relate to each other. So please open up your daybook to page 10 and follow along. Becoming an active reader. Imagine you are talking to a friend who hums and looks around the room as you try to engage her in a conversation. She probably doesn't hear a word you say. When you're reading, be careful not to do the same thing. Instead of tuning out and letting your mind go elsewhere, zero in on what you're reading and become involved. Please look at the directions on your handout according to your letter. When you get involved, not only will you pay attention to your conversation with the writer, you'll gain a much better understanding of what you are reading. As you read Alabama Earth, notice how one reader started to interact with the text through annotations. You're going to see that I'm going to ask you to go even further with your annotations. So friends, as you probably can figure out, we're going to read texts multiple times, especially short poems. Poetry is meant to be read several times. You're not going to get the whole idea one read through, and we're going to annotate. So at the top, I reminded you what you're going to underline and circle. It's also on your handout. Remember, you're focusing on your question or your lettered prompt. So when you annotate, you want to think about that as you're annotating. That's your purpose for reading. So I'm going to read it through once, and you're going to then read it through at least a couple more times. You're not going to start to answer your question yet. You're just annotating, so you're not filling out that worksheet yet, but you're thinking about your lettered prompt as you approach your annotations. So look here, I've asked you to write down 2 questions. So before you start reading, you've numbered your lines of the poem. You put 2 questions here like I have, 2 reactions with reasons. You're going to identify who that is. You are going to draw a quick visual at the end of your first or second read. You're going to think about why for here, and you're going to try to explain that. You're going to try to identify the chains and changes. Okay, so please follow along as I read this one time through, and then you'll read it a couple more times. Alabama Earth by Langston Hughes. At Booker T. Washington's grave. Deep in Alabama earth, his buried body lies, but higher than the singing pines and taller than the skies, and out of Alabama earth to all the world there goes the truth a simple heart has held, and the strength a strong hand knows. While over Alabama earth these words are gently spoken, serve and hate will die unborn. love, and chains are broken. So at this point, friends, you can continue to read the poem the additional times on your own. I'm going to read it through 3 more times if you prefer to follow along versus just reading on your own. Alabama Earth by Langston Hughes at Booker T. Washington's grave. Deep in Alabama earth, his buried body lies, but higher than the singing pines and taller than the skies, and out of Alabama earth to all the world there goes the truth a simple heart has held, and the strength a strong hand knows. While over Alabama earth these words are gently spoken: serve, and hate will die unborn. Love, and chains are broken. Reading number 3. Alabama Earth by Langston Hughes at Booker Washington's grave. Deep in Alabama earth, his buried body lies, but higher than the singing pines and taller than the skies, and out of Alabama earth to all the world there goes the truth a simple heart has held, and the strength a strong hand knows. While over Alabama earth these words are gently spoken: serve, and hate will die unborn. Love, and chains are broken.